When we talk about history, we spend a lot of time explaining concepts. Like, we have to discuss a bunch of different ideas before we can really put them together and start seeing the big picture. Spoiler alert, you guys know the things are going to escalate to a civil war. Come on, man, I haven't finished the book yet. Alright, stay with me. Let's pretend that we're baking a cake. A Civil War cake. And we're finally at the point in which we've assembled our ingredients. Slavery, ideological differences, and differences between the North and the South. Now, if we mix all these ingredients together and put it in the oven, you'll see that things are really starting to heat up. We already know that people are arguing on how this country should be run. There's a lot of disagreements about that. Well, now we're going to start seeing these arguments escalating to violence. Let's get into some specifics here. When we looked at the growing map of the United States, I kind of joked that everyone forgot about this territory up here. Like Kansas, Nebraska, psh, who needs them? Who cares? Well, it turns out a lot of people cared. Well, people cared about Kansas. No one actually cared about Nebraska. Remember, the United States is in a balancing act between free states and slave states. Each group wants more states on their side, so they're more powerful. So when the time came for Kansas to become its own state, we were once again in this predicament. Is Kansas going to be free or slave? The government decided that the state should take their own slavery stance. And they decided that popular sovereignty would be the deciding principle for this situation. The idea was that as the Kansas population naturally grew, as people started moving there and settling and buying land, eventually these Kansas citizens would vote on slavery and they would settle it once and for all. But people are really invested in this whole slavery debate. They are seriously dedicated to see that Kansas's laws align with their views of slavery. So a lot of people started to get an idea. They thought, okay, in order to get more power on my side of the slavery issue, we need Kansas to align with our views. In order to get this, we need to make sure that when the vote happens on whether Kansas will be free or slave, more people vote on our side. We can accomplish this by making sure we have a lot of our people living in Kansas. Therefore, we get more votes, and therefore, we get what we want. So, based off of all of this, what I'm trying to say is, we all need to move to Kansas. Like I said, the government expected people to slowly start moving to Kansas, to start a new life, to settle with their families. But with slavery on the line, things went a little bit differently. Things were chaotic. People were entering the state just so they could vote in the elections. Next thing you knew, you had a state full to the brim of incredibly divided people. And they were starting to get very cranky. This led to violence. So much violence that we would eventually call this chapter in history Bleeding Kansas, which is very like heavy metal band sounding. Things are kind of getting scary in Kansas. Towns are being burned, people are being attacked, stores are getting robbed. The more and more I think about it, it's really similar to like The Purge, essentially. The Purge is happening in Kansas. More than 200 people were killed during this ongoing mess in Kansas. You could really see that slavery was tearing this country apart. This is John Brown. John Brown saw all the chaos that was happening in Kansas, and he said, "Put me in, coach." Brown was an abolitionist. He thought that slavery was bad. An anti-slavery community in Kansas was attacked and raided. And in response, Brown gathered up his boys so they could go get revenge. In May of 1856, Brown and his friends went to a settlement where they rounded up 5 pro-slavery people and killed them with swords. Understandably, people have very different opinions on John Brown. Is he a terrorist who broke into people's homes and butchered them while they were asleep? Or was he a revolutionary who was seeking justice? Villain or hero? Now, I'm not going to make you write a whole paper on this guy, as much as I'd like to. I want you to consider John Brown when you really start to think about how tense America is getting. Violence is erupting over the issue of slavery. But hey, this is Kansas, baby! It's the frontier! Of course things are gonna be rough out there. Well, yes, but also no. Things were rough in even the most sophisticated places, like the Senate floor. Yeah, this place. This place where it just seems boring. Everything seems stuffy and dry. Yeah, violence can happen here too. What I'm about to tell you is crazy. So let me set the scene. This is Charles Sumner. He's an anti-slavery friend from the North. This is Preston Brooks. He's a pro-slavery friend from the South. They are both congressmen, elected by the people, for the people. And yeah, they acted like the people, all right. So Sumner gave this big speech talking about how bad slavery was. He talked about how slavery was destroying Kansas, how slave owners should be ashamed of themselves, and finally, he called out one guy in particular. It was the cousin of Preston Brooks. Well, Brooks wasn't having this. He was not happy this guy was getting in front of everyone, talking trash about slavery and his family. The two things near and dear to his heart, I guess. So Brooks decided to do something about this. Now, remember, these guys are congressmen. They are civilized gentlemen. They're not a couple of punks wandering around the wasteland of Kansas. So Brooks decided to settle this issue like an adult. He nearly beat Charles Sumner to death with a cane on the Senate floor. This man straight up attacked Charles Sumner, and he showed him some of that Southern hospitality, you know? Now, Sumner lived, which gives me permission to tell jokes. I can joke about this now. But on a serious note, this attack shows you how tense things were getting. This event was a huge deal. Violence wasn't just something that was happening off on the outskirts of society anymore. It was something that was happening at the seat of our government. This was supposed to be a sacred area where people discussed differences like adults and practiced democracy. Now it's a place of senseless violence. When I tell you that things are really heating up in the United States, I mean it. People are tired of arguing, and they're taking matters into their own hands. All of this nonsense and violence, they are symptoms of the greater issue. But what is that greater issue here? What changes happened in the United States that made things escalate this much? Well, it kind of stems from this idea of popular sovereignty. The government basically said, hey, I don't want to deal with this slavery problem, so I'll let you guys figure it out amongst yourselves. You guys, the states, you can decide this one. Before, public opinion was kind of just public opinion. But now, with popular sovereignty, this opinion could be law. This is the kind of thing that the framers of the Constitution were trying to avoid. They were fearful of this idea of mob rule, in which all of the population would get together and decide the law and enact it themselves. And this is the kind of stuff we're starting to see in Kansas. Well, this was a fun lesson. And by fun, I mean senselessly violent. But I like talking about this kind of stuff, because we can see all of these ingredients coming together to make a cake. A Civil War cake? That's fun. Well, anyway, that about does it. On Monday, Mr. Kilmoyer is going to take over, and he's going to talk about an important court decision that is just one more ingredient in this messed up cake. But I'll see you guys next week. So, take care. Bye!